Oh, Shabbat Shalom, y'all. It's Mac. Well, take a look at the Maccabean period, the Greeks, the temple dedication, and the aftermath. Hasmoneans, all those people. Let us start at the beginning. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, okay, not that far back. We can start with Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that troubled him greatly. He called all of his wise guys, magicians, astrologers, and Chaldeans. I thought this was curious, as Chaldeans are a people group of the area. Genesis tells us Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldeans. Anyway, in this case, a group of Chaldeans were the diviners and advisors to the king. Daniel chapter 2 has a comic element. Nebuchadnezzar wanted this group of wise guys to tell him the dream and its interpretation. Unlike Pharaoh, who recalled having a troubled dream, but could not recall the dream, Daniel does not indicate Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten the dream. Nebuchadnezzar told his wise guys to tell him the dream and its interpretation. If they truly had the magical powers they were supposed to have, what would be the problem with telling him the dream? And if they just made something up, he would know, as it seems he did remember the dream. In verse 9, Nebuchadnezzar told the wise guys they had been lying to him, but this is going to stop right now. They either tell him the dream or he'll kill him. When the king's guard came to kill Daniel, he asked for some time. He called his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They prayed to God, and God revealed the dream and its interpretation to Daniel. This was the dream of the statue of the head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. The dream ended with a stone that was cut out without hands, struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. The head of gold, Babylon. The chest of arms and silver, Media Persia. Belly and thighs of bronze, Greece. Legs of iron, Rome. Feet of iron and clay, the revived Roman Empire, composed of 10 kingdoms, or 10 toes in this case. Yeshua, the stone cut out without hands, will defeat the Roman Empire, but we're getting ahead of the class. This is yet future. Note the metals went from soft but valuable to hard but inexpensive, at least until you get to the legs of iron. Or to the feet. Iron is hard and has value, but what possible good is iron mixed with clay? It might look good, but it's completely worthless. Anyway, we're concerned with the Grecian Empire, the belly and thighs of bronze. Daniel chapter 8 speaks of rams and goats. Daniel 8:20-25 from the New King James Version. The ram which you saw having the 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 horns and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its original power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty, and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. So Daniel is telling us Antiochus Epiphanes will become a problem, but not by his own power. Evil forces will be hard at work. Verse 14 tells us the temple will be defiled and will not be cleansed for 2,300 days, or a little over 6 years. But it will be God who fights the battles. That explains the miraculous Maccabean victories. Josephus tells us Alexander besieged Tyre and sent emissaries to Jadus, the high priest, requesting assistance. The high priest expressed loyalty to Darius, which of course upset Alexander. A character named Sanballat, a problem we first read about in the book of Nehemiah, went to Alexander during the siege of Tyre and pledged his allegiance. Sanballat then proposed his son-in-law Manasseh, who was brother to the high priest Jadus, have his own temple under his control. Thus the people would be divided and would be easier to defeat. Nice guy, this Sanballat. Tyre fell, and Alexander moved on to siege Gaza. 2 months into the siege of Gaza, Sanballat died. Gaza fell, and Alexander made haste to go up to Jerusalem. Jadus, the high priest, was rather concerned about his life expectancy, as he has recently snubbed Alexander. He called for all the people to offer sacrifices and pray. God appeared to Jadus in a dream and told him to adorn the city, open the gates. He and his priests were to wear their priestly garments, and the people were to dress in white. There would be no ill consequences. Alexander arrived and disappointed the Phoenicians and the Samaritans who followed him. They thought, due to Alexander's previous displeasure, they would be given liberty to plunder the city. Alexander arrived, walked up to the high priest, and saluted him. The people in return saluted Alexander. Armenian asked Alexander how he came to honor the high priest when all people honored him. Alexander said he did not honor the high priest, but the God who has honored him with the high priesthood. It turned out Alexander had seen the high priest in a dream, and God told Alexander he would prevail against Darius. Alexander then went to the temple to offer sacrifices to God under the direction of Jadus. The priest showed Alexander Daniel chapter 8, describing how the Greeks would defeat the Persians. The next day, Alexander promised the people would enjoy the laws of their forefathers and pay no tribute on the 7th year. He also granted the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws as well. Alexander recruited a large number of men from Jerusalem to join his army. The next article is from the Land of Israel in the Hellenistic Age by JewishLearning.com. Alexander died within a year. His generals could not keep the kingdom unified, and it soon fragmented. Ptolemy took control of Egypt in 323 BCE. Jerusalem went back and forth several times between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids in Syria. By 301 BCE, the Ptolemies had established control. They began stationing soldiers throughout the land and established cities where Greek soldiers would marry Jewish women. The Hellenization of the people had begun. In 201 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus III conquered the land and took it from the Ptolemies. They were solidly in control until the Maccabean revolt, 168 to 164 BCE. Hellenism had strong foundations and the country was being divided. There were factions who supported the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Conservatives stuck with Jewish culture, but the cool kids embraced Greek culture. Chabad.org begins the story of Hanukkah with Antiochus III. He affirmed the rights of the Jewish people to continue practicing their religion without hindrance. However, he had lost a war with Rome and had to pay tribute to the Rome. Like any politician, he did not spend his own money. He extracted heavy taxes from various peoples in his empire to pay his tribute to the Romans. Antiochus III died, and his son Seleucus IV took over. He further oppressed our people. With problems from the outside, there were also enemies within. Hellenism was increasing. These were people who accepted idol worship and the Syrian-Grecian way of life. Yochanan, the high priest, foresaw the danger to Judaism and was opposed to any attempt on the part of any Jewish Hellenists to bring Greek ideals and idol worship. The Hellenists hated Yochanan, and one of them told the king's commissioner about the great deal of wealth in the temple treasury. The wealth in the treasury consisted of the contributions of half a shekel made by all adult Jews annually. That was given for the purposes of sacrifices on the altar, as well as for fixing and improving the temple building. Another part of the treasury consisted of orphans' funds, which were deposited for them until they became of age. Seleucus needed money in order to pay the Romans. He sent his minister, Helydros, to take the money from the treasury of the temple. In vain did Yochanan the high priest beg him not to do it. Helydros did not listen and entered the gate of the temple. But suddenly he became pale with fright. The next moment he fainted and fell to the ground. After Helydros came to, he did not dare enter again. Seleucus was killed, and his brother Antiochus IV, that's the bad guy, came to reign in Syria, 174 BCE. Antiochus IV was meaner than a striped snake. He was called Epiphanes, meaning the God's beloved. A historian at the time, Polybius, gave him the epithet Epimanes, madman, a title more suitable to the character of this harsh and cruel king. Antiochus IV wanted to unify his kingdom through the medium of a common religion and culture. Antiochus tried to root out the individualism of the Jews by suppressing all the Jewish laws. He removed the righteous high priest, Yochanan, from the temple in Jerusalem, and in his place installed Yochanan's brother, Joshua, who loved to call himself by the Greek name of Jason. For he was a member of the Hellenist party, and he used his high office to spread more and more of the Greek customs among the priesthood. Joshua, or Jason, was later replaced by another man, Menelaus, who had promised the king that he would bring in more money than Jason did. When Yochanan, the former high priest, protested against the spread of the Hellenist influence in the Holy Temple, the ruling high priest hired murderers to assassinate him. Antiochus was engaged in a war in Egypt. Messengers from Rome commanded him to stop the war and return home. But a rumor went about that a serious accident had befallen Antiochus and he was dead. So the people rebelled against Menelaus. Antiochus was already angry with the Romans when he heard about his boy Menelaus being run out of Jerusalem. He ordered his army to attack the Jews. Many were killed. This is when Rabbi Eleazar was commanded to eat pork, so others would do the same. Eleazar refused and died. The Syrians messed up when they crossed Mattiyahu and his sons. Mattiyahu was an old priest. The Syrians came to his town of Modi'in and built an altar. They ordered Mattiyahu to sacrifice a pig thereon. He refused. But a Hellenized priest stepped forward to do the deed. Mattiyahu killed the Hellenized priest. Yes. Then he and his sons killed several of the Syrians, and the survivors fled. Thus began the Maccabean Revolution. Through a series of miracles, the Maccabees defeated the Syrians and rededicated the temple. Farmers, tradesmen, merchants, and Torah students were eager to leave the army and return to their former lives. Torah was once again the supreme law in Israel. Judah Maccabee realized they could not stand down now. The Syrians would be back. Not only were the Syrians a concern, but the descendants of Edom, the Idumeans, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and Phoenicians all revived their ancient jealousies. Much like today, Israel was surrounded by enemies, and the Hellenistic Jews were still bitter enemies within. They hated everything Jewish and longed for the return of the Syrians. Within 6 months, Judah led the army to drive out other foreign invaders. The remainder comes from jewishhistory.org. 5 years after the dedication of the temple, the remaining Maccabees were Jonathan and Simon. Jonathan was the high priest. The Greeks were defeated militarily, but continued to undermine the Jewish government through assassination plots and pitting Jew against Jew. Very similar situation we have in our country today. Enemies could not unite us under any of the false religions of our day, such as global warming. They're attempting to defeat us by dividing us into several small groups. Jonathan was kidnapped and held for ransom, requiring the Greeks to enter Jerusalem and reestablish a foothold. When the Jews refused, Jonathan was executed. Simon was the last survivor of the family, and he founded the Hasmonean dynasty. Simon was the king, but after Jonathan's death, he became high priest as well. Simon was righteous and used his power to destroy idols and get rid of the Greek ideas. The leading rabbis asserted that the king must come from the tribe of Judah, quoting Genesis 49:10. However, the rabbis agreed there was no other better to be king than Simon. Simon made another mistake. He made an alliance with Rome as they opposed the Greeks. Rome deployed its 10th Legion to Israel, and that came to cause other problems. The 10th Legion was the primary army that destroyed the temple and killed many of the people later on. Simon was murdered by a son-in-law, and Simon's son, Yochanan Hyrcanus, assumed the dual role of priest and king. Yochanan was also a righteous man, but his legacy was good and bad. Yochanan defeated the Idumeans, the tribe of Edomites, or Esau, and sent them through forced conversions. The Idumeans eventually integrated the officer rank in the Jewish army. One of the converts was the grandfather of Herod the Great. So the Herodian dynasty became possible out of this time period. Yochanan helped strengthen Torah education in the land, raise the bar regarding the service in the temple, and improve the temple edifice at great expense. Yochanan threw out the Greeks, but kept the Romans penned in around Caesarea. He expanded the border of Israel to the outskirts of Damascus. He took the seaport of Jaffa, and Jews became partners with Phoenicians in shipping and trade. Jews moved to North Africa to establish trade routes. Some also moved to Italy and Rome. Many Jews immigrated from Babylon. Yochanan reigned for a long time and died in his bed, which at that time was a major accomplishment in and of itself. The year was 104 BCE. Prior to Yochanan's passing, he allied himself with the Sadducees, who were forming out of the Hellenized Greeks. And he thought by working with them, he could convince them to more to his way of thinking. But all he managed to do was help them gain power and authority. So anyway, Antigonus of Soko was a Torah teacher early in the Second Temple period. He would say, do not be like the servants who serve God on the condition of receiving reward. Rather be like servants who serve God without expecting reward. A couple of his followers, Zadok and Boethius, interpreted his teaching as there is no reward or punishment. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This was a very Hellenistic way of looking at things, and thus the party of Sadducees was born. There were 3 planks to their platform. No life hereafter, no reward or punishment. There is no such thing as oral tradition. The priestly class is the ruling class. It was one thing to hold these beliefs as the Hellenists before them. It was quite another thing to call the movement Judaism. The Sadducees had to undermine traditional beliefs in the oral tradition in order to successfully establish themselves as the ruling class. By the time of Yeshua, the Sadducees were the modern Hellenists. I recall Yeshua saying positive things regarding the teaching of Pharisees, but I have no recollection of Yeshua saying anything positive about the Sadducees. Opposing the Sadducees were the Parashim, or Pharisees. Parashim means to separate, because they separated themselves from the Hellenists and all outside influences. They were the Torah sages and the traditional Jews who attempted to maintain a pristine state of Judaism. According to Josephus, about 75 to 80% of the people supported the Pharisees. But the Sadducees were part of the wealthy aristocratic class and strategically placed in government.
Yeah.
They also dominated the temple and served as its priests.
Yeah.
Similar to today, very few of us would align ourselves with communists, but they are disproportionately represented in government and other institutions, to include the Christian church. Thus began a political religious conflict in Israel that would last 100 years. Thus, the time period involving Greek rule, the Maccabean period, and the Hasmonean dynasty, was most important in forming Israel to what it was during the time of Yeshua. Economically, this period brought in the merchant class and the fact that there were Jewish merchants all over the known world.
Yeah.
Politically, the Romans were invited in, leading to Roman occupation. They probably would have come in anyway, but during this time period, they were invited.
Yeah.
Roman occupation probably would have occurred anyway, perhaps with more destruction and loss of life. By the time of Yeshua, the Romans handpicked the high priest and approved political leaders. The Herodian dynasty would not have occurred without forced conversion of the Idumeans. Without Greek influence and the peoples embracing thereof, the Sadducees may not have existed. Without the Sadducees, their complete opposite, the Pharisees, may not have existed. Israel would have been a very different place, and the history recorded in the Gospels and Acts would have been very different.
Very good.
Thank you.